A few remarks on Donna Haraway and who she is. She's the Distinguished Professor Emerita in the History of Consciousness Department and Feminist Studies Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Although this is her best-known work, her work on the cyborg, human-machine relations are just one aspect of a much broader analysis of what it means to be human according to relationships with the world around us, and she's particularly interested in animal relations, how humans and animals live together. She identifies as a white female feminist of Irish Catholic background. She has a PhD in biology, and because of all the time she spent on California, from the late 70s onwards, in a way, her work belongs to a certain kind of post-war California culture that related to both social and countercultural change, and also technology and the invention of digital cultures. So she describes herself as a feminist, and she describes herself as an unreconstructed, old-school Marxist. And she argues that Marxism and feminism's fear of technoscience, this historical tendency of both feminism and Marxism to be afraid of technology, to look at technology strictly in terms of domination, is somewhat problematic. So she sought, in a way, to bring science and technology and the politics of science and technology into Marxism, into feminism, in a new way. So a few other key works. Her Cyborg Manifesto is what she's best known for. But in 2003, she wrote another manifesto, the Companion Species Manifesto, which took human-animal relations as a new place, a new point for thinking about significant otherness. So if technology provided one way for rethinking the limits of the body, its politics and its history, our relationship to animals, which involves everything from play to devouring them, provides another case for thinking about the human in relationship to external actors. That work also became, that manifesto was, I don't want to say the foundation, but an important point of reference for her subsequent book, When Species Meet, in 2007. When she talks about this idea of companion species, she starts thinking about the way in which human beings are knotted together with animals, but also other organisms, landscapes, technologies, so that, in a way, species is not some inherent, the human species is X, or the dog's, canine is that, but rather species are defined by their entanglements, according to Haraway's analysis. Her work on cyborgs was most famously published in the book Simians, Cyborgs and Women, The Reinvention of Nature in 1990. Here we see that book. And in that book, she particularly situated the cyborg concept in relationship both to human involvement with, for example, apes and gorillas and monkeys, but also histories of imperialism, histories of technology as coextensive with settler colonialism. So one aspect of her work is this critique of first wave feminism that I mentioned earlier, where she says we need, and among other things, to reconsider what counts as women's experience in the late 20th century. The struggle over life and death, the boundary between science fiction and social reality, is an optical illusion, she writes. So, in the changing conditions of, we could translate this to say that in the changing conditions of a control society, in a set of global networked flows, our identity, our sexuality, our gender, our class are actually bound up in technical and fictional flows. Now, one of the reasons she's interested in the cyborg is because it's such a central figure in contemporary fictions. She writes, by the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, that means illusions, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is our ontology. It gives us our politics. And here we see three different movies that deal with this kind of fiction. RoboCop from the 1980s is a very masculinist fiction of becoming cyborg, of becoming robot. And in a way, when Donna Haraway makes her intervention, when she writes her fiction of the cyborg, she's trying to overcome this masculinist fantasy of computing as a technology of domination, a technology of law and order, and so on. And she anticipated in some ways turns that digital culture would take in subsequent decades. So we have two other movies here. We have Her from 2013, about a character that sort of falls in love with a virtual agent. And then we have Ex Machina the following year from 2014. So Ex Machina, among other things, is this question of not just can machines pass as humans, which is a classical question of artificial intelligence, but could machines pass as women? Could machines pass as objects of sexual desire? Now, there's certainly ways in which to say that this is a very old, unreconstructed myth of male sexuality in machines, to be sure. However, it does also seem that Her and Ex Machina do investigate the way in which technology troubles gender identity and gender norms, okay? And it stages the way in which computing and information is never just simply a machine to sort data or to communicate, but is a way of intervening in something like libidinal flows, sexual flows, desire. So the idea of a cyborg politics, the idea of thinking of our identities as being theorized and fabricated, mixtures of machine and organism, is in a way piggybacking on a broader set of fantasies that are already circulating in fiction. And it's taking advantage of this fantastic place that the cyborg operates between science and technology to start rethinking something like the contours of digital culture. So, in this context, drawing on fiction, drawing on science, Haraway makes this claim, which could seem a little counterintuitive, but starts to make sense when you start seeing the peculiar upsets that cybernetics, communication technologies can have on sexuality and biology. She writes, quote, "The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. It has no truck with bisexuality, pre-Oedipal symbiosis, unalienated labor, or other seductions to organic wholeness through a final appropriation of all powers of the parts into a higher unity. The cyborg skips the step of original unity, of identification with nature in the Western sense." So let's break this down. She says, the cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. Okay? The cyborg myth that Haraway is trying to tell is, in this sense, a utopic project. We know that we live in a world where gender does in fact exist. So when she says the cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world, one of the things she's indicating is that the story she's telling here is utopic, is imaginary. It's an attempt to imagine other possibilities from the world we live in. Now, when she says it has no truck with unalienated labor or other seduction to organic wholenesses, part of what she's saying is that it's not simply that the cyborg comes along and disrupts the existing, power relations to help us recover a world before technology or before capitalism or whatever. There is, as she puts it, no original unity. There is no nature for the cyborg. Okay? Whether you're talking about labor, whether you're talking about race, whether you're talking about gender, all of these things have no original wholeness, no original unity, no original identity. Everything is fabricated, everything is historical, everything is cultural. One of the peculiar aspects of Haraway's analysis is that she holds on to a kind of Marxian criticism. She's interested in a world which is produced through power relations that relate to capitalism and so on. But she shifts attention to the life sciences. She's calling attention to today with, for example, technological supplementation, with cybernetics, with information technology, and their growing involvement in the management and reproduction of life. You could think here of IVF. You could think here of birth control. Biology and science themselves become a site for a kind of critical analysis of power relations and economic relations. One term for this shifted analysis is to talk about technoscience, not science in the sense of discovering nature, but science as the product of technology, as a deeply situated cultural and historical practice where humans and their world, nature and culture, labor and the machines we use are deeply, deeply embedded in technological production. And the truths that science reveals are partially truths that relate to our technological framework. And she keeps on returning to this notion of the cyborg as a certain mythical figure, an imaginative figure for getting a grasp on these relations of production. She writes, communications technologies and biotechnologies are the crucial tools recrafting our bodies. These tools embody and enforce new social relations for women worldwide. Okay? Here we see a theme that touches on a kind of Deleuzian control society. Production is no longer about the factory. It's no longer strictly about industrial, centralized production and so on. Communication itself, but even biology itself, have become tools for organizing social relations, organizing power, organizing the economy. So the myth of the cyborg, even though it's mythical, is in a way a kind of wedge or a kind of lever for grasping some of the real power relations, the real industrial relations governing our epoch. And this is kind of the meaning of the ironic political myth, the ironic utopia that Haraway launches. It's at once imaginary, and yet even in its imaginary aspect, even in its speculative aspect, it provides a better framework, she argues, for critiquing contemporary political economy and for thinking about political possibilities of the future.